The 21st century leader is going to be an authentic leader.
I feel like who I really am is a stranger to me.
It is a painful thing when you become aware. If you decide to be authentic, it's going to force you to be bare. What's waiting on the other side of authenticity is a more integrated you.
Welcome back to another episode of the New Roles Podcast. It's your girl, Breezy, and I am here with my wonderful host, Adrian Crawford. You're in a silly, goofy mood.
I am in a silly, goofy mood right now. Our producer, Lauren's not happy with me right now, but I think she will be okay. Love you, Lauren. But yeah, I am in a silly, goofy mood, but I am actually excited about the podcast today.
Yeah, so the last episode we were in the car.
We were, yeah.
Did you enjoy that?
I really did. Yeah, I really did. And so again, I'm excited to be doing some different ones this year, in different locations. So it should be fun.
Cool. Well, not the last episode, but the episode before that, we did a podcast about Write New Rules, the genesis of new rules. And today we're going to do a similar episode, but it's going to be about authenticity.
All right. I'm excited. Let's do it.
Cool. So to start us off, can you tell us how was the concept of authenticity introduced into your life?
Wow. It's a great question. I think that it was a word that started to get used, especially around 2010 to for a decade, 2010, 2015, 2020. And that word just always stood out. Even when I was younger, that word stood out to me. But as I started to unpack it, I would just say that's when it became more and more relevant to me, is between that 2010 and 2020 era. Again, I'd heard the word authenticity, but when it became something that I felt like was so important was around that time.
How old were you, 2010 to 2020?
Oh, boy. Let's say I was 30.
He said, let's say.
No, I
was 30.
I was like 31, 30, something like that. Yeah.
So whenever you were younger, what did authenticity look like within your life?
I think it was that I was very fortunate that my father really pushed really hard for me to be authentic. And what I mean by that was that when other coaches or other people wanted me to play a certain position in basketball, but my father kind of saw something in me, he really always encouraged me to do that. I saw authenticity play out when, I had a huge imagination. So I saw it a lot play out when I would be with my friends, whether we were playing different games out there, indoor basketball, to playing we had guns, you played this game called War, stuff like that. You got to see it. So I just saw it a lot of times just in those individual times through my creativity.
I'm curious, did he use the word authenticity?
No, he didn't.
How would you have described it?
I think he would just always say, you need to be you. You know what I mean? He's just be the original you, which ultimately is authenticity, but he just was saying just be the original you.
So when you were younger, when you heard someone tell you, just be the original you, what did you think that was? I
think it was, what I could try to do was I always would look at somebody else, right? So it's the original me was, I just tried. So during that time, say basketball, because it was such a big thing. So someone like a Magic Johnson, right, who was playing basketball, I was kind of I could pass the ball. So I would just, because I love basketball, so I would just look at somebody like him. That was the original me. Or I love Michael Jordan. So that's the original me. So it was never me, because I didn't really know because I didn't really see a picture of what that could be. I just saw glimpses of different people, maybe who looked like me, or maybe had a skill set. I had a skill set they had, so that was kind of how I look at it.
Can you recall the first time you felt as though you were being inauthentic?
Yeah, there were just moments when I would find myself in environments trying to fit in, when I moved back from Akron, or moved back from Knoxville to Akron, for example, 6th grade, and I'd come back, and it was funny because I lived in Akron and I was in Knoxville for a few years, and then I kind of had a country accent. So it was really? Yeah, it was wild. I kind of had this country accent. So since I had this country accent, it was really interesting. And so so my friends so I would just try to work really hard not to say certain words. But it kind of was like, so I always found myself like not feeling like I was fitting in. And then when I was in Akron the first time, majority of all my friends were black. Then I moved to Knoxville, majority of my friends were white. Then I moved back. So it's kind of like, you lived in like, skater culture and like, this punk rock stuff. So then I'm going back to Akron where my friends are, I'm not telling them I listen to like Bon Jovi or anything like that. You know what I'm saying? So you feel like you had to live in a different type of way.
So I've heard you talk pretty frequently, and I feel like you've discussed this on the podcast as well, that growing up you've always felt overlooked, undervalued, and misunderstood. So how, with that being your starting point, how did authenticity become prevalent to you?
I think it became a value because when you're overlooked, what you end up doing is like you don't want to be overlooked. So you try to do whatever you can to like fit in. So what you begin to do is morph to the environment and places that you're at. But even when I would morph to those environments, it still didn't feel right. Like there was still something in me that began to feel like I was being suffocated. And I would walk out of environments, though people may have applauded me or I kind of fit in, they paid attention to me. It didn't feel good. And so it started leading to deeper levels of depression for me, deeper levels of loneliness, because even though I was there, I started feeling like I was being distant from myself. The best way I explain it is like having an outer body experience. I felt like I was not really me. But even though to people, I was having success and doing things like that, but I did not feel like I was really being me. There were so many things that were going on inside of me, so many things I recognized and I just wouldn't say or do because I was so worried about being rejected by people. And this was even in a church space where you feel like, man, it should be the space where you should be like you. But again, it wasn't on the people. A lot of it was just on me because I was just trying to do whatever it took because I really just wanted to fit in.
I guess one of the reasons why I'm kind of pressing into the original story for you and how it started is because that's where most people find themselves right now. So though we're going to get to the process of what it means like to become authentic and how do you do that, but I think the starting point really matters because it's where most of our listeners find themselves right now. Yeah. What do you feel like the feeling of being overlooked then leading to you pretending to be somebody that you're not, what do you think that did to you over time?
I think what it did to me was it created just this kind of distance, and in that it created all types of internal just turmoil where I was out there. I felt like this fake and fraud. I didn't feel like myself, even though I still was doing like good work. I just did not feel like myself. I would find myself alone and like I would walk away from a conversation and be like, why did I like say that? Or why did I even try to get involved in that conversation? Or why did I act like I knew some of this information when I didn't really know that much of that information? Why did I laugh at some of those jokes I thought were stupid? Why did I go in there and, and kind of just try to morph to whatever. And what that did is just started making me sadder and sadder because what I started to realize was that, am I going to spend most of my life like just not ever really being able to be like who I was when my close friends were around me and no one was there? You know what I'm saying? Like, there's moments where I would just I like certain types of humor. I would say certain things. And there's times where I just love like fantasy stuff, like, Lord of the Rings and movies like that. And I just wouldn't say anything. And I was like, why won't I do things like that? Or at times I would have insight to things and people would be talking. And here's what happened. Sometimes when I would share those things, insights that sometimes that like, I just see the world this way and here's where it's going. Then people were kind of just like, no way. They would kind of like crap on it. So then I'd be like, God, when I share who I am, that's not being accepted. So I just don't want to share that. So you just felt like you're going to spend the rest of your life not really being able to live out who I actually felt like I was supposed to be. And here's the truth about it. I just had those feelings, but I didn't know what that really was. I didn't really know who I was. And so it was kind of like I just knew I wasn't being me. And so I felt like I was just going to live a life just kind of as this fraud, as this person kind of lost.
Did you have a moment where you realized that you were living inauthentically?
Yeah, I was really, man, it was probably around like 15. No, it wasn't that long. About 12, 13 years ago. It was actually when we were first starting like the church we lead Engage. And I was sitting in, somebody we mentioned, Dr. Mike Zoda's office.
How old were you then?
I was 33 when it happened. And when I was there, because I got to that place because I was just in that very deep state of depression. And what it was that I couldn't explain why I was in this deep state of depression. I just knew I was there, and I knew I didn't want to go on. And in that moment, he said something to me the first time I walked into his office. And he was like, you know the right things to say and do, and you live those right things, quote unquote. And he was talking about the Bible, things like that. He's like, but you're very disconnected, your head and your heart. And then I've mentioned this before, but then he says, Genesis chapter 3 in the Bible, he says that Adam and Eve, there's a story, and then in the story, God comes looking for Adam and Eve after they were tempted, and God asked Adam, "Where are you?" And the point is that he was like, do you know why he asked that question? And I was like, and I love the book of Genesis. I talk about the book of Genesis all the time. And it was really frustrating to me in that moment because I'm like, how in the world can I not know this? As much as I studied Genesis, it was like pissing me off. I couldn't figure it out. And then I was like, no, I don't. And he was like, it had nothing to do with, he's like, do you think God's all knowing? I'm like, yeah, I believe he's all knowing. He's like, well, then he should know where they were at. And I'm like, yeah. He's like, so why? And I was like, I'm frustrated. I'm like, just tell me the answer. And finally he said it had nothing to do with Adam and Adam knowing or God not knowing where they were at. It was like, was he aware where he was at? And he was like, that's the question God's asking you. Are you aware of where you're at? He's like, I don't think you do. He was like, you're very disconnected, your head and your heart. And if you can start to figure out genuinely where you're at, your feelings, your thoughts, your emotions, whatever, your hardwiring, all that stuff like that. He's like, I actually think you'll start to walk out of this depression and things like that and really start to see changes in your life. And so that was kind of the beginning of the journey.
Who is someone else outside of Dr. Zoda that has inspired you to live authentically?
Man, I would say my youngest daughter does. She really does. Kind. Yeah.
That's true.
She really is. She beats to her own drum. You know what I mean? And she's kind of her. And even though, and I see her struggle sometimes. She wants to fit in, but I think because she's grown up in a house where we really push the idea of dealing with emotions and emotionality and doing that, I think there's times where she can't not be her. And so at times, I joke with her a lot, but I think she really does do that. I think there's people people who I watch who I don't know, but somebody like Jay-Z does, you know what I mean? I feel like he did something different. I thought he lived in a different way. And I think, I could go on and on about just people close to me who did, but I think about those two specifically, I really did.
Mm-hmm. Something that we talk about a lot within the work that we do, because authenticity is a focal point, is the word itself is overused, and because it's overused, it's watered down. Yep. So what do you have to say about what authenticity truly demands of you?
Yeah, I think it truly demands the first and foremost of real honesty. And I would say this, I think authenticity demands a willingness to be vulnerable because of what's going to happen. If you decide to be authentic, it's going to force you to be bare. It's going to force you to step out. It's going to force you to be out there. And you know what? Some people really may not like that. Some people will. Here's the other thing. You have to be vulnerable because some things you think you are not. But there's also going to be things that you never thought you were, that you are. So it's a very vulnerable place to be in. And I think a lot of people don't want to be there because I think a lot of us don't want someone to tell us the truth. I think we love being lied to. I think we love lying to ourselves. And because of that, what we do is we spend most of our lives just living in what Thomas Merton says, that we live in the shadow. That most of the time what we do, we're a shadow of ourselves. We're not really who we're supposed to be. And then what we do is we compare ourselves to other people's shadows, and we live. And what Thomas Merton says is that then when you do that, he's like, you lose all sense of peace, all sense of hope, because you're living in unreality. And he was like, and it's true. When you live in your shadow, it's unreal. When you're living, what he means by your shadow, who you're really not, who you're trying to project that you think you are to the world. And so I think it's just vulnerable. You have to be willing to be vulnerable to ultimately, and then from there's a process of what I believe defines what defines authenticity. But I think the biggest thing are people willing to be vulnerable. That's going to be the number one thing, I think.
Whenever we spend most of our lives studying the shadow, the version of us that we think we are supposed to be in order to be accepted and loved, and we're kind of faced with the chasm that starts to exist, and we start to try to discover who it is that we actually are. I'll say this personally, like I feel like who I really am is a stranger to me. And that can be so isolatory, I think, within itself. So what's it like to get to know who it is that you really are supposed to be?
Yeah, it really is like you're introducing yourself to like a stranger. So it's kind of like, just imagine you. It's weird because it's like you're introducing yourself to a stranger, but the person feels very familiar. It's like meeting somebody and you start hanging out with them for the first time, but you feel like, dude, I feel like I know you, and I feel like we've been friends for a long time, but I'm just getting to know you. That's kind of what it's like. And it was that beginning journey, because there were certain things where I'm like, you just start to be honest. You're like, yeah, I really don't like that. Why did I never say I didn't like that? Or, man, I didn't realize I like this. Or, oh, I didn't even know this was actually a strength. Because a lot of times I think some of our strengths that we have are things that we bring to the world that's great. It sometimes gets twisted, and we begin to like despise those things. We begin to find ourselves in situations where who you're really supposed to be actually is needed, but when you're needed somewhere, many times that can get rejected. So then you begin to not like that part of you, and you begin to think that's the enemy part of you. And so it's just like getting to be okay with those things. But it is like you said it perfect. It's like getting to know a stranger, but a stranger you're familiar with.
Do you ever not like who you are?
Oh, absolutely. Yeah, for sure. I think that because there's times where I don't want to feel what I feel. There's times I don't want to know what I know. There's times where I wish I was ignorant to certain things. And so it makes me not want to be who I am. There's times for me where I don't want to be a person who pushes against certain things. I just want things to be the same. Where when you know that, that's going to cause maybe pain, or it's going to cause people, maybe not to like you. You're going to feel like you're going to be misunderstood. And even being misunderstood where you're not going to even be able to defend yourself to the people who people may say whatever. I think that really does like impact you. Yeah, so there's just things at times you're like, yeah, I don't like it, and I don't like things about that about me.
Do you think that you don't like it because of like the demand of authenticity is that you have to face that you being who you are will actually cost you? Like it can cost you relationally. Do you think that that's why you end up not liking who you truly are, is because of what you feel like it almost takes away from you?
Listen, living in society in our world, being disconnected from yourself is a vibe for most people. Most people live there. So when you actually live like you have an awareness, it's just painful. So yeah, you're losing, like you're like, yeah, man, the whole thing, ignorance is bliss. It really is. But I don't think you really fully get to enjoy and experience life when you live that way. But it is a painful thing when you become aware. So I think that's what it is for me. And also, like anybody, I just, there's the self-worship part. I want people to like me. And so when you start to do that, but here's the illusion of it, though, honestly, is that people don't like you even when sometimes you're the false self. So it's just kind of like, I'm like, well, if they're not going to like me, let it be, because I can, like have an understanding and enjoy it, because I believe that when you're doing that, you're producing the best results in life when those things happen.
Yeah. What do you gain instead?
I think what you start to gain is you begin to have, it's like a superpower. I think when you're not living according to that, I think you have some level of like whatever ability. But when you really begin to have an understanding of who you are, it becomes very freeing. That's a superpower, because you begin to know like, not this is who I am. Nope, I'm not that. So you can look at a situation and be like, yeah, I'm not going to get involved in that because like I don't know what I could do to help. You can be like, being able to be in a room and recognize that like, man, I have no idea what they're talking about. And that's cool. Like I can just sit there and be like, man, just learn what they're talking about, and don't feel like I have to like show people, oh, I know that you're talking about, quantum physics or whatever. I don't know. But it's like, nah, fam, I have no idea. And that's like, it's freeing. It's freeing to know that. It's also freeing to know when you actually know what you do well and what you actually can bring. Because what you begin to do is like you can freely bring that to the world. See, that's the other thing too. Most of the times we're just doing trades. When you live in a shadow, you spend a lot of times trading things, right? So I'll give you this, I get this. I give you this, I get this, because you feel like because here's the truth about it. When you're living out of that, there is a limit. But when you actually know who you are, I don't believe there's a limit to like what, like from living out of like this, the abundance of like your skill sets, your gift, the essence of who you are. That's why I can talk about stuff and it may be a new idea. And I'm like, sometimes I used to be like, oh man, I need to wait and hold off. Like, that's like the perfect time, the right audience to do it. So it's no, I just believe. And I was like, no, I just believe that I'm going to always have stuff to talk about and stuff to give and never run out because it's really the essence of who I am.
Can you tell a story about a time where you chose authenticity over comfort?
Yeah, for sure. I have a few. I would say like starting Engage, and here's the reason why is because I am, bivocational. I mentioned that where, I didn't feel like I was supposed to be a full-time pastor. But most people said, you can't do that. You'll never get a church past 200 people. No one does that. And then I also, on top of that, I wanted to be a multi-ethnic thing. Okay, that's another knock against you. And I also want to reach 18 to 35-year-olds, okay, where you're not going to have a church that's going to have enough money to sustain itself. Then it went to, I want to have a multi-use space. We just don't have a building that just sits there. So all these were things against me, but I feel like that's who I was supposed to be. Because here's the thing, it's the essence of it is like this authenticity. It's like seeing the world different. It's the whole idea we talked about like this. I don't see the world a certain way. I see it to what it could be. And so I just saw something and I felt like I was supposed to I've been this disruptor in my life. So I wanted to bring something new and a lot of times when you do that, people think you're saying, oh, nah, you're better or you're bringing this new way and the old way doesn't work. I'm like, no, I never said that. What I'm saying, this is just the way I feel like I'm supposed to do it. Now, whoever vibes with that, great. Hopefully it can be an asset for them. If it doesn't work for you, that's awesome as well. What you're going to do is going to work for you. And so I think that when we started, we did it and then just have watched it over now 12 years, just how this thing has impacted and grown. And what's really interesting is now the people who really doubted it are the people now asking me to help them to be more authentic in who they are because they've actually just seen the results. I just believe you produce fruit when you are absolutely who you're supposed to be. So that's one. I mean, I could give an example of, when I'm doing the basketball training and coming back here and I was like, man, I feel like I'm supposed to do basketball skill training. And no, you shouldn't do that. You should go to Atlanta, go somewhere with a bigger city. I'm like, but no, I feel like it should be something here. And then it was disruptive. Who's doing basketball skill training? You had coaches who didn't like me because they thought I was starting to steal their players, even though I wasn't coaching a team. I was just helping their players get better. But I just kept fighting through that. So those moments, though, even though, and what's funny about those were still in the moments where I wasn't fully aware of who I was. It just came out. But I look back on those moments, and what's funny, I wish I would have known what I was doing more earlier. Because if I knew that earlier, I think I would have produced way more fruit a lot faster.
Why are most of us afraid to live an authentic life?
Because now you'll have a realization of who you really are. I think we love the idea of who we are, not who we are. We all have an idea of who we are. We all have this made up thing of who we are. And we really begin to believe that. But once you begin to live authentic, it's really now, it's putting it out there to see if you really got it. That is why, I tell people, everybody loves the backup quarterback because he's the guy who he's got it and it's all potential. Versus when you're a starting quarterback, it's like, oh, no longer potential. It's like, do you got it or not? When you live like in this false authenticity or not really being who you are, then it really shows, do you got it? Are you really as good as you think you are? And if you're not, that's okay too. But most people don't want to bring that stuff. That's why you see people a lot of times they'll talk about, oh man, they don't have opportunities, they don't do this, and they never bring their work to real life. Because why? When you bring your work to the market will judge if it's good or not. The market will judge if you have the talent or not. The market will judge that. And I think a lot of times people don't want that. They want to just stay in those shadows and live in those illusions.
How do you become a master of authenticity?
I think you have to do those three things that we talk about. I think you have to be self-aware. And self-awareness is just a constant understanding of your feelings, your emotions, your motives, your character. I think as well, you have to then be resilient, which is this internal fortitude to bounce back amidst like external pressure. You face pressure on the outside. Do you have the internal fortitude, the ability to come back to who you originally are? So if you're aware, then pressure hits, right? So, we talk about this all of a sudden, man, I feel like I'm supposed to be this, but then society, friends, family, spouse, whoever starts to push against that. And then all of a sudden you're like, whoa. And then you want to start morphing to whatever that is. It's to feel that, but then be able to bounce back to who you are. And I think you got to be able to empower. I think you have to become an expert in empowering. And what that is, it is just really the act of giving power away. I think when you live out of the authenticity and the essence of who you are, that's when you're the most powerful. But it was not meant for you just to hoard it. It was meant for you to go give it to the world. And I think that's the problem with the conversation today about authenticity, is because most people want to become authentic just for the sake for themselves. But authenticity and the discovery of it is not for you. It's meant for you to discover. It's everything to do with you, nothing to do with you, because it's for you, everything to do with you because it's yours. Nothing to do with you, because I believe that any authentic life is meant for the flourishing of humanity. And so I believe that that's why you should do it. And I believe that's why it's been so wrong in today's world, is because most people are just doing it for their own selfish desires, not for the betterment of other people.
Do you believe that you're a master at self-awareness, resilience, and empowerment?
I don't know. I think I'm getting closer. I think that am I better than most? I think I am. And being that, I think a lot of times people are like, what does that mean? I don't think you're going to reach full self-awareness, full resilience, full empowerment at this like 100% level in your life. I think you're always on this journey. I think really good people who actually are authentic, they even still know where their shadows are. But they can recognize when they're in their shadows and make the adjustment there. I think that's what it comes to. I think most people think, oh man, it's kind of like people who like struggle with, like, I had friends of mine who, I talk a lot about emotionality and emotions and emotional health, but because I still struggle sometimes with my ups and downs, they would literally try to like dismiss the conversation around emotional health. Well, if it worked, then why are you still struggling? I'm like, that's not the point. The point is, like, when you become emotionally healthy, it's not that you don't like still have struggles. It's just now something that used to take you, 6 months to deal with, you can deal with in like maybe 25 minutes or whatever. It's like, no, you keep getting better. And so I think that's the same thing with authenticity. I think it's just you continue to go step by step. So to answer that, I think I'm better than a lot, but I still think I got ways to go.
Why have you fallen in love with the process?
Honestly, it's because I've seen what happens when I can help somebody else do it. I watch how they begin to flourish in life. That is why I want to, because I feel like if I can become even more of an expert of self, I can become more of an expert of others. And I want to see other people walking at so many people I see walk around in life dissatisfied, hurting, frustrated, feeling forgotten, feeling like they're just wasting their lives. And it's not that. It's just that they are so distant from who they are, and they've just fallen into the trap of society of these are the rules you have to be, this is what you have to do. And they're just trying to play a role, and watching somebody get unlocked and actually live that out and start that journey, and then watch them come alive. Watch people now for the first time begin to realize, oh, it's okay. Yeah, you love that. That's amazing. Do you remember, man, why did you like music? Oh, man, I remember I like music because of this. And it was because I love, like, the melody. Oh, okay, what about the melody do you like? It's just every part of it. And then they'll just go from one thing to the next thing. And next thing you know, they start to discover all these different things just from something when they were a kid. They used to listen to music, and now it's led to this other stuff. All that being said, it just really it gets me excited to do that. I can talk about that and talk with people all day. The other day I was sitting there in one of my favorite places, Fuma. Shout out to my guys at Fuma, Marquise, and all of them. And I was there, and when I was there at Fuma, what happened was that there was a young man who came and sat next to me, and I was talking to his parents earlier, and then they left. He's a law student, and one of the first questions he asked me, he's like, "Yeah, I've been trying to figure out my purpose. What do you think about purpose?" And I'm like, I'm like focusing on something else I was doing, but I'm like, dude, it's like literally you say that, it's like, yeah, I'm just gonna, it's like somebody arguing about who's the top 5 basketball players. Doesn't matter what I'm doing. I'm stopping. We're going to argue about it, right? And so for him, I started to unpack it, and it was just like life. I could sit there all night doing that.
Most people don't have the courage to embrace the process. How do we help people that come to New Rules to get help with this? How do we help them face those fears?
The first thing is this. I think it's laying out to them the process first. It's letting them know that what's going to happen. I always tell people, when you start this journey, it's like opening the closet door, and it's been a monster in the closet you've had truce with. When you open the door, the monster's coming out, and it's going to get worse before it gets better. And I think that when people are willing, and you have to tell them, you have to stay the course. You're going to want to quit. You're going to want to close it because you've learned how to function. And people who are willing to just stick it out and just go through the process and trust, they're the ones who get it on the other side. It's those who don't, and they end up questioning things like that. And the more I do this, the more I'm getting to a place where, like, I'm just not going to argue with you because I actually know what works and what doesn't work. I actually know that when you do this, you're going to be a way better leader. I know when you do this, you're going to be a way better father. You're going to be a way better wife. You're going to be a way better friend. You're going to be a way better leader in your community. You're going to be a way better at your skill set. And so I know that. I've seen way too many now. I'm not the smartest person on the planet, but what I am good at is understanding patterns. And so in understanding patterns is this. I've just seen the pattern now. I see it work. And I watch people be able to now things get better. They enjoy things more. They're like, oh, there's just their happiness, their joy in life begins to change, and their impact begins to change. And so for me, we just start preparing them for this, what it's going to look like, and then we start the process. But it's going to be a journey for them.
What's one invisible rule that society has about authenticity that's holding people back?
That is what you feel. That I think the rule about authenticity is like, man, if I feel this, then that's what I am. And I don't think that. I think feelings are a part. I think you can, that's why everybody talks about, oh man, my passion. I'm like, yeah, that's a breadcrumb. That's not who you are though. We don't go deeper than that. Like I'm passionate about playing like NBA 2K, like, but I'm not good enough. Like that's not my career, is to be, a gamer. But why do I like playing 2K? I don't like playing 2K online or people, doing stuff like that. I like playing by myself, or with somebody I know, playing a dynasty or franchise. Why? Because I love to build things. I love to create things. So I'm building that there. So so I can just say, oh, I'm passionate. So most of your passion, then you should go be a gamer. Like, no, that's not it. And I think a lot of times people go by what they feel. And so in that, let me just say this. Finding authenticity is really layered. It's a thick thing. It's not a thin thing. Like we think sometimes it's just what I feel, or just, I'm just good at this or whatever. Like, no, it's all of those things. It's what does the world need? It's what are you good at? What are you passionate about? It's also in what you're passionate about. It's like, man, what was your upbringing coming up with this? What is, like, can you really apply this right now into this? Where's the world at? Because maybe some of the things that you're doing right now, like it was for me for a long time, I wouldn't have, trying to bring this to the world 10 years ago, it was looked at as crazy. Now it's like, oh, people are starting to see it. I mean, we started in 2020 about this idea of authenticity. Now all of a sudden in 2025, we're seeing all these articles coming out from McKinsey and other consulting groups about, it's about the inside out leader. It's about having self-discovery, be aware, be resilient, empower others. I mean, all the stuff we've been doing, now some of the largest firms are doing actual research on it. And that's what we've been saying. The 21st century leader is going to be an authentic leader. It's going to be one who has a very good understanding of their internal infrastructures, and then being able to now have the ability to live those things out that way. And so that's what we've been doing, but that wouldn't have been okay 10 years ago because we weren't there yet. But I think for people, like, you have to think about all those factors into really your authenticity living out, but it's just not your feelings. It's much deeper.
Authenticity is almost perceived as an individual pursuit, but we talk about it a lot as a movement.
Yeah.
How has New Rules Collective shifted it into the mindset of being a movement?
Yeah, it's because I believe that when an organization can be authentic, meaning that we have this mission, we're going after this mission, and then when we're going after, this mission, and I'll explain, when we're working with a company or you're working with an organization, they're going after this mission. Now you build your values that hold that, your strategies around that, your HR stuff around that, your pay plans around that. Everything's around what you're trying to accomplish. And what people will do, just like we talk about as an individual, they'll begin to look around, and normally what happens in a business, it's usually finances. The finances become the thing, just like in society, in individual, it's acceptance. And so when it comes to an individual, we want acceptance. When it comes to a business, we want it's money, right? And what you'll do is start compromising who you are. You'll become something and start going off track to what your original purpose is, because why? It's not making the money you think you should make. And so what we do is we have these goals sometimes where we got to make this, this, and this, and we don't know why we need to make this, this, and this, and we start to compromise, and we just become like everybody else versus the unique version of actually you. And so that's why we've turned this into a movement, because I believe when you do that, people find it. It's funny. I was reading an article. I'm like really doing this deep dive into organizational psychology, and I was doing this thing. It's called the Hawthorne effect. It was a big survey kind of data thing they did like in the 1930s during the Great Depression and stuff like that. And it was based off, I want to say it was like, maybe it's like it was AT&T, Atlantic Bell, something like that. And it was one of their factories. Like over 40,000 people worked in this factory, and they just started, they started just doing all these different conversations and data tests about like satisfactory at work, whatever. Because back then it's the industrial age. So it was like people were just like cogs in a wheel. You know what I'm saying? But what they started realizing then like in the 1930s, they were like, oh no, people need meaning. They were like, people do better work when they understand their work is moving something toward a goal. And that was like in the 1930s, at the height of the industrial age. It hasn't changed because human beings were made to have meaning. Human beings aren't cogs in a wheel. We think it's just, if they get the right pay plan, right? No, it's not that. Human beings, when they understand that, man, I know back then it was, I can see where we're going, and what I'm doing is affecting that. I think now it's, do they have an awareness of who they are? How does who they are now get to play out into the mission of the organization, and is that making the organization go forward? That's how you begin to have job satisfaction. That's how you begin to get better work. And so I think that's why this whole thing, I believe, is the future. I believe that what the world is looking for is authentic companies, brands, authentic people. And those people are there, it's going to be that. And you know what? They're okay with who they impact, who they're around, who they're supposed to work with. You're not for everybody, but you are for somebody, and you have to be able to stick to that. And I think that's kind of been the movement of what we're trying to create. We're really trying to create those who get in our vortex, they become authentic. That if you're around us, we're going to suffocate falsity out of you, and we're going to help you be who you need to be.
How do you determine when who you are is actually unhelpful to a room?
That's a great question. When I started realizing it wasn't healthy in a room, it's when I was so hell-bent on sharing what I knew, and it wasn't about the people. It was actually about me. I want you to know that I know these things. And when you start to realize when it's not healthy is when you bring something up, and it's just people just stiff-arm it. They're not ready for it, and that's okay. And I think so many times we're like, no, but I'm a truth teller. It's like, no. People, when they're ready to receive it, they'll receive it. So sometimes what I'll do, I'll throw something out there, and I realize like, no, they aren't. They reject it, whatever. I'm like, okay, cool. I just shut up, just keep it moving. And I think that's always hard because you're like, man, I know I can help you though. I know this will be this, but at the end of the day, people have to want to be ready to move, and no one does anything until they're ready. And so I think so many times we try to push and force people to do it. People don't move until they're ready. You're ready when you're ready.
How do you, I guess in a similar vein, at some level, authenticity has to do with personality, your values, identity. When you're in a room, rather than it being like, oh, there's something that I have that is great, that is being rejected, because that can happen. What about the situations when it's like, I'm not the best person in the room to take up the space right now, because there's someone else who has a different quality or a different value that's needed for this conversation, that there's something good I can always add, but in this situation, it's probably just better for me to sit back and not think like, because the expert always thinks that you need what they have. Yes. And just be like, you know what? You don't need what I have right now.
Yeah, because I think what you're saying, and I think you actually do a really, really good job of this when you sit in rooms, it's that we sit in rooms and what you're looking at, you're thinking about the person. When you're just thinking about you, then you're like, yeah, you need what I have. Versus like, no. I'm observing the room, and it's like, no, if I'm really looking at it, I know what they need right now. And what they need is this person saying this right now. So if I'm in a room sometimes, it's like sometimes they do need me to challenge a certain way. Sometimes you do a really good job of being able to say, okay, take it and even hone it down even more in a very succinct way, getting more like that 20,000 level. And so sometimes it'll be like, that's why I'll turn, hey, Bri, what do you think? Because I think I'll be pushing them, pulling them up, and you're able to do that. Or if I'm in a room with a Dr. Zoda or someone else, like, with Doc, sometimes they need the unpacking of that. So when you're thinking about what's best for the person, then you're able to be okay. And the other thing, when you're really secure in who you are, you realize you don't have to take up space in the room. You let someone else take up space in the room. That's why I don't like the thing of, and I know at times I've said it in the past where it's like, oh man, people to be fully themselves when they come. No, if everyone's fully themselves in a room, there's no room in there. It's like you have to be actually secure to realize, oh no, this person needs to have space now. Let me step away. You know what I'm saying? They need to lead now. It's like a dance. They need to lead now. Then it's like, oh, you know, if they need this, then I need to lead now. And that's where, but when you think about the other person better than yourself, that's how you do it. When you're only thinking about you, that's when it gets a little bit wonky and you're not bringing the very best of what that person needs.
How do you determine how much of you is appropriate to show in any given relationship? So some relationships are more mutual, like marriage, friendship. There's some like you're the leader in the room. There's sometimes when you're in the room with your boss. How do you determine what you bring at any given time, given the relationships?
Yeah, I think it's understanding like what someone's willing to invite you into. So like I think you have to understand hierarchy in a room. So if I walk in a room, let's say I'm in a room with the president of the United States, right? If I'm in the room with the president of the United States, just on sheer title, right, or whatever, that's the most powerful person. And let me back up. If I'm in his environment, like if I walk into the White House, I'm in his environment. So you know what I do? I'm a guest. So,
and also, why are you there?
Yeah. So if I'm in a room with the president of the United States and he says, hey, we need help with, within my executive leadership team where we're not lining up. This is kind of my agenda. We're trying to move in this direction, but we're not lining up. I need for you to help us unpack why we're not lining up and how do we get to this place and da-da-da. And that's what I mean. So I was like, oh, okay. So then I would step in and say, all right, here's this. So I would use my skill set, but it's being invited. I think that's one of the biggest things. I see this a lot of times with people, and it's really frustrating, is that when you're in someone else's environment, you have to think you're in their home, let them invite you there. Can you imagine if someone who you invite to your house just walks into your bedroom? You know what I mean? You'd be like, yo, fam, like, we're cool, but we're not like that cool if you just be walking up in my bedroom, right?
Moving stuff around.
Yeah, moving stuff around. Hey, big dog, give me something to drink. When, they're laid up sitting there watching like Netflix in your bed. You're like, no, we're not cool like that. I think so many people, because they're so insecure and we are so insecure, we come into a room and it's like we take up space, like we own the place, versus when you are a guest somewhere, your thing is like, how do I serve that person? So listen, I believe I have the ability to communicate, do some things really well. But when I go into a room or an environment, I get invited somewhere, I'm asking them, what do you want me to do? How can I help you? Because I can say, oh, yeah, this is what I think, and I'm just going to bring who I am. No. Like, I'm going to speak in a couple weeks in Philadelphia. The first thing I ask my friends, like, hey, what can I do to help you? You tell me what I can do to help you, because I'm there to serve you, not just like bring who I am and do whatever. It's to serve that person. I think that's one of the greatest ways you can do that. When you're in a room, say you're in a room with your boss, it's asking that question. How do I help right now? How do I serve right now? What would make my boss look better in this moment right now? And let your boss invite you in. Or here's another one, like when we're in a room together. One of the things that I do is like, I'm always trying to figure out, okay, hey, in these moments, Bri, what do you think? Because I'm trying to make sure you're staying engaged, but also there's really good content and insight that you have. And so I want that to be brought, but you do a good job of waiting to let me lead in those things. And I think when you do stuff like that, that's when rooms really work really well. When you think of the other person better than yourself and you want to make them look good. So that's the best way to do it. You should be in a room saying, how do I make everybody in this room look good? If you do that, you will be, I think, the most powerful person in the room. If you walk in the room and say, my whole job is to make everyone look good. A great example of this is like tonight, is even recording. Like I have to do the radio for Florida State basketball. So it's a late game, but the guy who I do radio with, Jeff Colhane, is amazing. Jeff, literally, like his whole existence, we're doing the radio stuff, it's like, man, he just sets you up to just be the best version of you. And so what it makes me do is I'm like, man, when Jeff's on a roll and things get going, so I know like after a big time play, right, Jeff has all these catchphrases and things he does. So when he does that, I give Jeff room. Even though I'm hype and I want to say something, I've learned, I got to let Jeff cook right here, because he's got catchphrases he says, things like that. If we win, I know at the end of the game, nose win, plant the spear. He does this whole deal. So I just step back and let Jeff do his thing. Why? It's because, man, I'm like, I want him to be great, because I watch what he does for me, and this is his profession. He helps me get better because he just creates room. And I think the best people create room for other people to be better.
there are times where you should make sure you're not violating your values.
Yeah.
And so I think the White House example or the president example is a good example, because if that were to be the situation, you would say, hey, if you want someone who's going to act this way, I'm not the best person to do the job. And because you have such a good understanding of yourself, you're going to present that up front. You're not going to say like, oh, this is a great opportunity, I'm going to like try to, get in where I fit in and like do what I can. You would be more like, hey, if you want me to violate this, this, and this, I'm not going to be the person for you.
Oh yeah. Like, for example, we met with somebody yesterday with our company and the kind of new division we're starting. And here's the reality. I heard this statement from Jensen Hung. Like, I exist to torture you to greatness. I'm like, yeah, 100%. I'm like, I know I am. So I was telling that person, we were in there very clear, like, no, this is going to be like, if you come here, you will reach your max potential, but there's going to be so many times you don't like me. And you need to understand that, because I'm not going to not be that, because here's what's going to happen. Because if I'm not who I'm supposed to be, then I'm not bringing you the very best to help you be who you need to be, but you need to understand what that is. And so now everybody's an adult. Everybody has a free will. You can make that choice. So when you've made that free choice, I always point back to that, because I know I'm going to get to that place where you're like, well, this is too hard, or this is this, or this is whatever. You're right, it is. But nothing good has ever not come without a lot of level of pain and suffering and sacrifice. I mean, that's just reality. If you want to be great in life, it is just suffering and pain, because that's how you get to the next thing. But on the other side of suffering and pain, it's like working out. When you suffer and go through that, but at the end of that workout that you got through, man, you do. It's like, when you feel so much better that you got through that workout at the end of it. And so it's the same thing. And like, once you get through it, so there's always good parts about it. Anyway, all that being said, I just think, you got to be upfront, be honest, and don't violate who you are. And I think a lot of times with people, they just, to get a job or to get a thing, and I've done that before, to get a job, get a situation, you kind of dumb yourself down. But what you'll end up doing, you end up being so frustrated in that process.
If every organization and individual within the world were to act authentic or to live an authentic life, what would be different?
I think we would see job satisfaction, let's start there, go up. It's been 34% for the last 20, 25 years, job satisfaction. I think that goes up. I think that communities get better. I think schools are better. I think families are better. I think there becomes more serving in those communities. I think you begin to see more innovation happen. I believe you begin to see more kind of people create better systems and structures, because people who love systems and structures are really okay with building systems and structures. I just think that just cities and places and homes and communities just start to flourish, that they're better. That's the best way I can explain it. They're better. Like, man, people would begin to show up in a city and they'd be like, oh man, like, I don't want to leave this place. It just feels right. And so I think that's what will really happen.
What's your declaration for authenticity? Not just for New Rules, but for any of our listeners who might be feeling stuck in the process?
I would say that you're going to go through life, and life is going to have ups and downs. There's going to be pain. But one of the worst things you can do is go through life and experience that as an actor, not really who you need to be. We should want to feel the fullness of that. You should want to feel, when you're authentic, you feel the fullness of high moments. When you feel the fullness of pain. And that's a good thing. You feel the fullness of disappointment. You feel the fullness of those moments of encouragement. I mean, you feel all of it. When you're an actor, you still go through it. You still feel pain, but you don't feel it at the fullness of what it needs to be. And what I believe is that what's waiting on the other side of authenticity is a more integrated you. You don't live disconnected. And when you start to live really integrated, you begin to really find joy in life. You begin to move forward in life. Life becomes more full for you. Doesn't mean it's perfect. Doesn't mean you're not going to have sadness, down moments, whatever. But it begins to be way more days of full, way more days of you get excited to wake up and to be able to move forward with the stuff that you do. Well, guys, I hope today was actually helpful for you. Again, I really appreciate the conversation. This is something that is really a core value, a core part of actually who we are here at New Rules, core part of who I am as a human being. And I really believe we are living in the age of authenticity. But in the age of authenticity, this is something that Charles Taylor said, I kind of reframe it. The age of authenticity, I believe we're living in an age where self-awareness, resilience, and empowerment can be the thing to make humanity better. I believe that we all have an opportunity to say at the end of our lives, the worlds that we get, did we make them better? The world that you're in, was it better? The lives you're around, were they better? I think when you live from a place of authenticity, that actually happens. And so that's my challenge. You need to be authentic, because you don't know how much of the world you get, but you are responsible for the world you do get. And our responsibility is to make that world better. Until next time, keep writing new rules.